Many findings to share. If we state it here, we tested it lots. I'm not saying anything here like, oh, we kind of felt or we kind of thought or whatever. So when I'm talking about the findings here, test it in 16, test it in 17, test it in 18, run this routine. Does it, it always comes out at 22 hours or no, sometimes it was 40 hours and no, we test. Anything I found here, we wrote it down. Many of the tips, super common sense and common knowledge to a senior FileMaker developer. You guys are going to know a lot of this stuff. There's going to be some surprises here. I think I've got one or two things that you go, I did not know that. I've been doing this for 20 years. And I was just like, man, this is really kind of interesting. And guess what? This is with FileMaker 16 on a laptop a year ago, et cetera, et cetera. You go 19, we have not tested all these things with 19. And we haven't tested with different OSs and blah, blah, blah. So of course, your mileage may vary. Let's talk about the file. Recovery can break things. I think we know that. The interesting thing for us was 18 broke things that 16 and 17 did not, which is really weird. We did a recovery of a file. We got the end of the file at the very end. I always just scroll right to the end. No modifications. File is safe to use. Not, hey, we found something. You might want to copy your data out. Nothing like that. This is safe to use. And that recovery added a circular join to our file. It actually created this join that you see in red that did not exist before we did the recovery. It says, we didn't touch the file, and as soon as we went on to either of these two layouts, we would immediately have a crash. So, oops, I did not know that recovery could make a system, I knew that it could wreck some things to help save your data. I've never seen it add a join to a table before. Absolutely happened here, absolutely reproducible on our particular system. Talked with Claris at the DevCon last year, sat down with a couple of tech guys who kept going to grab their supervisor and then their supervisor. And I said, hey, all of this font memory in a file, can we get rid of it? Can we scrape this gunk out? They said, no, really, we can't. So one of the guys on my team came up with the theory that he kind of thought he heard some guy in Pakistan over a coffee had told him, I don't know, it was something, we have not tested it yet, but his theory is if you grab a file, a clone of a file that's got all this font memory in it, and you have a Mac computer and you uninstall all the fonts except the system font and then open this file on a Mac computer that does not have any access to the internet or whatever, could it pull all this stuff out? I don't know, but the Claris tech support guy said, we know of no way to scrape this gunk out of your file. So we're like, So the lesson to you is don't let it get in there in the first place, because if it caused a problem, we don't want to have it come back again. Versions matter. We're sitting there looking at an 80-hour window of time that we got to get down to 22. We started playing a lot with the versions. FileMaker 18, all I'm talking about now, again, 16, 17, 18. This is not 19 because it wasn't ready for prime time yet. FileMaker 18 had the fastest exports. Measurably, I want to say significantly, but measurably. And of course, at this point, we're looking for every tiny little speed advantage we can get. FileMaker 16 had the fastest imports. Who knew? FileMaker 17, as we kind of discussed earlier, gave us the most reliable recovery. I've never heard anybody talk about these three things before, but we tested these things with this one file over and over again, and we were able to go, yep, 17 has given us the best recovery, 18 is jacking it up, 16 doesn't seem to fix as many things. 16 consistently imported faster than 17 and 18, and then 18 exported stuff much faster than the other two. So again, I'm not saying like it went from an hour to 15 minutes. It would go from an hour to maybe 50 minutes or 45 minutes or whatever. But if you're doing that for 68 exports, adds up.
So you specifically jumped to the most efficient version for your process then?
Wait for that, young lady.
All right.
It's an excellent question. Hold tight. So we also found that looping scripts, doing our CSS processing script, saving a compacted copy of a file, et cetera, all these things, we tried 16, 17, 18, didn't matter. Didn't matter. They were roughly about the same. No consistent winner in those cases. But these three things up above, we felt those were significant. Let's talk about save compacted, a couple of little things. So one of the things, old wives' tale that I've heard, and I've actually seen and benefited from this before, is on your source file, if you're getting ready to do exports or migration or whatever, on your source data, compacting it before you do any exports or whatever, can that make it faster? So we tested that, slightly faster exports. But it took over an hour to compact the file before we did it. So we really said, you know what, if in the middle of our 24-hour window, should we save a compacted copy and then do the data migration and then start doing all this stuff? No, it really wasn't worth the effort. It actually slowed us down. But if you do need to do lots of exports or things and you have the option of compacting, and that's not going to hurt your time frame, it does lead to slightly faster, but not significantly in the tests that we did. I will tell you, I have done other things before where it can be faster for exports and so forth, but in this particular situation, not so much. Compacting, absolutely. If you're doing as much data manipulation and movement, you're importing, you're exporting, you're deleting a bunch of records. So again, the live files, we deleted containers and legacy data. You know, we imported this stuff into the V4 version. We did all the CSS processing and stuff. Compacting afterwards, we felt was the smart thing to do. You get a smaller file, you get faster reads, better file health. Any little things that are about ready to go bad, a lot of the time a compacting can kind of rewrite that entire file. When you do compact a file, it tends to make inserts or writing, adding new records, so forth. Those actually can get a little slower because it's got to add the structure to the file to support that. But in general, I think it's probably a good file health thing to do. And I think most people are doing reads and reports and searches and so forth on a database. If you're in a full transaction, always just adding new records all the time, that might be a different thing. But I think doing a compacting periodically is a smart thing. What about exporting? FileMaker doesn't like moving lots of data fast. I think you can say that empirically about almost anything in the world about FileMaker, right? Hey, I want to do a search, a report, an import, an export, and it's gigabytes of data. FileMaker doesn't like that. FileMaker is not built for speed. So just, you know, anytime you're looking at large amounts of data, understand that you're pushing against some limitations of FileMaker. Single user mode is your friend. You know, when you're doing these kind of processes and so on and so forth, obviously use the client, which is going to be much faster than if it's hosted. But if you have the file set to single user, it doesn't have to monitor these sharing threads and so forth. So a lot of your processes are going to be faster. Very commonly known, avoid exporting unstored calcs or summaries. Those have to hit the FileMaker calc engine. It has to process that. Keep those out of your exports when you're pushing just data out or doing migrations or things of that nature. The data migrator is pretty badass. It's a huge gain for our community. Again, having to, you know, in most situations, migrating from a 45 gigabyte file from one file to the other, which we got down to 42 minutes, that, you know, in the old days was a 24-hour window. I mean, it was really just export, import, reserialize, and so forth. So the data migrator is pretty cool. It can still take hours on big files. So we saw that initially, that some of the first migrations we were doing, hour 15, almost 2 hours on some of our earliest tests. And there's an option in the data migrator where you can strip the formatting. We didn't get the results that we wanted. We still saw some crazy formatting and some diaresis and umlauts and so forth. We saw some things leaking through that didn't work as well as we would have liked. Otherwise, we wouldn't have gone through that whole sort of CSS apply thing. We could have done this thing a little more selectively if we'd stayed with the data migrator, but we didn't get the format cleanup that we wanted as well as we did with merge files and going to UTF-8 and so forth. So again, our exports, we tested 4 or 5 different export methods. Which one's fastest, which one gives us the formatting, which one retains the diaresis and things of that we needed. We found out that UTF-8 with no formatting selected, and a merge file format was the best. It gave us our field labels, which was helpful when we're mapping our imports. It retained those, oh, pardon me. It retained those, the international characters and dots and so on and so forth. And because the UTF-16 file was quite a bit larger, it was slower to generate. So the UTF-8 seemed to be small, fast, retained the international settings that we needed, and gave us field labels. So that's what we used for this. How about on the other side, on the import side of things? I don't know how many people use truncate table, but it can be much faster. So, you know, we're doing all this stuff. We're pulling the data into the scrubber. We've got the live system. We do have to sit there and go, hey, let's delete some records. And so we were doing some of this concurrently as well. We're deleting records. We're deleting all records in the V3 version of the file while we're getting the V4 stuff ready. So truncating table is faster than delete all records, except sometimes it's not. We tested that. So we actually found most of the time truncate tables was generally faster. But there were a few times when delete all records was a slightly faster advantage. So if we didn't have cascading deletes to worry about or whatever, we could use delete all records on some tables, others we use truncate table on. So you might want to check that when you're looking at some things. So truncate table, I think everybody's going, oh, it's faster. Test it, that's how you know. And the other thing to know about cascading deletes is with truncate table, you're not deleting any related children records. So it's the safer one to use most of the time. But there were times when we're looking at a child table that has no grandchildren to it, and delete all records work faster than truncate table. So we looked at both of these and used the one that was faster, that was reproducible and faster in each case. So we're also doing import new records back into the live file. We exported everything, cleaned the data, pulled it back in. There were times when we were importing new records. We could delete all the records and pull them back in. There were containers and other things where we said, you know what, it's actually going to be a bigger pain to delete those records, import, and do a bunch of other processes that are going to be less easy to automate. So we did have import matching, where we're bringing in maybe 15 fields of data, but we're keeping the primary key and some other things inside of there that we didn't need to pull out. So anytime you're doing an import matching, you're having to use the join engine of FileMaker. It's having to kind of pull together and match things up. So anytime you use import matching, it's generally going to be much slower than just an import new record step. So this is a huge one for us, guys, huge. We set all of this stuff up. We said, great, go import, 45 gigs of data. When we got to the rows that had 5 to 9 million rows in them, by breaking these imports into small batches and importing them in batches, we saved days off of our import. So we went from 80 hours to 22. Probably the single biggest thing that we did that broke that down was by scripting, grab the first X number of records, import those, grab the next X number of records, import those. So by not importing all the records in these really large tables, saved a huge amount of time. And we did a lot of testing. Our testing tool had the option to go, what size batch do you want to use? We scripted it so we could say, let's try different batch sizes. We tried 50K, we tried 100K, we tried 200K. The interesting thing was 50K, we're doing lots of smaller batches. That was slower than 100K. When we moved it up to 200, we tried 250, I think, a couple of other things. But 100K batches, bringing 100,000 records out of 9 million rows over at a time, way faster than just letting this thing just chug slowly over days. So that's a big gain right there that we learned, and I think you guys should pay attention to that too. Some findings on FileMaker server. Progressive backups. I think a lot of people avoid the progressive backups. I think they're afraid of them. I think they think they're a bit of voodoo. They're really not. They're relatively easy to set up. Progressives, again, you set the window, 5-minute, 10-minute, 15-minute. FileMaker saves a full backup. And so getting that initial progressive takes a little bit of time. But once you have those full backups, FileMaker server just keeps rotating the A and B copies out and applying the changes. And the ability to have a full working backup that's 15 minutes old, that's completed and in good shape, as opposed to a full backup that has to copy everything over, pause the database, copy over the last bit, etc. We just found that there was way less burden on the server by having these progressives running, and again, saving to a separate physical drive. So we weren't taxing the database. We weren't taxing the database hosted volume. We had a separate physical hard drive, RAID 10, that we're setting these progressives to. Much faster, much more security blanket, and it was relatively easy. And it seemed to just have much less burden on the server in general than running hourly full backups or things of that nature. The server scripting engine dislikes PSOS errors. There's actually a lot of stuff I found on the internet, just kind of Googling this and so forth. There's a lot of people talking about PSOS errors and how it caused little intrusions or possible slowdowns or possible crashes on FileMaker servers or whatever. So I would sit there and say, if you haven't spent the time, go look at your server logs for errors of that nature and pay attention to that, because the server just doesn't like them. And as we got those down, we started seeing more predictability there. So try to get those down to 0. It might be impossible, but try to get those down to 0. IT training is crucial. Again, if you're going to have an IT shop that has to pull down the server, restart it, etc., run them through the gamut. Let's teach them the command line. Keep a laminated card of the codes inside the server room. Make sure that they have access to that. Walk them through. Here's a little scripted menu, or here's a to-do list of what you do. First, try to disconnect all users, or pause the database, or stop the database files, close the files, and that, whatever. Do those in a sequential order, give them some options, but training them keeps things from getting worse. And I think if that had been done years ago, we'd probably still have a few crashes in this file, but probably less. All of these sequences, getting the clients kicked off in the proper shutdown sequence and so forth, important. Also, because of the progressives, we had to move them to progressives. We added progressives and then reduced the amount of full backups accordingly. But we wanted to run a fire drill. Hey, let's pretend like we just had a crash. What do? Go to the server, drop everything, grab the progressive, copy it over here, blah, blah, blah. So to do all of that, let's run through that a few times, make sure everybody's checked out on it. So if you do have to do it, you're going to do it properly and not harm your data and so forth. Hardware. This is kind of geeky but fun. I really liked some stuff here. So at the time, I had a MacBook Pro. I want to say it was a 2018, 2016 version or something like that, probably a 2018. It was 2.9 gigahertz, i9, 6-core, 32 gigs RAM. Pretty beefy little Mac box, pretty top of the line for its day. We also had their Windows Server, which, again, 3.4 gigahertz Xeon 12 core. It wasn't 12, it was actually 16 core. That's a mistype there. 128 gigs of RAM and 4 RAID 10s. And no matter what we did or how we split out the drives or blah, 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 my Mac smoked the heck out of that server in terms of doing imports, exports, loops, and so on and so forth. So all of a sudden we're going, hey, Dave's little, $3,000 MacBook is way faster than this $40,000 Windows monstrosity. So that's part of why you saw me doing a lot of this stuff on the Mac laptop. It was faster, way faster. One of the things, again, we were testing this. We do test every day, take the files home on my laptop, run on a spare laptop. Now I would run them 24/7 on the kitchen table. Number one, it's not popular with the wife. She's like, what, you have all these hard drives and cables and power strips. And I'm like, yeah, leave me alone. I'm trying to run this. I got to test this. I want to see. And I'd pop up in the middle of watching TV. How far are we? How fast are we? I was doing that. So not popular with the wife. The other thing I found out, it's hard on the battery. The spare laptop that we had got so hot, we got the battery swelling and it kind of separated from the case and all this sort of stuff. So yeah, a FileMaker, a Mac laptop is not a good 24/7, supercharged, let's run this thing 24/7 doing some really intensive processing. So it can be hard on the equipment. One of my favorite things about this entire excursion is what's on this slide right here. This is really, really cool. Let's talk about drives, because again, FileMaker disk-based database has so much that depends on the performance of the drive. If you haven't seen these Samsung X5s before, amazing. Crazy fast little SSD external. No power supply. You plug in a USB-C Thunderbolt, you plug it into your laptop, crazy fast. Crazy fast, like way faster than any other drive we were able to find that we could connect up to a Mac. I can copy a 45 gigabyte file to my MacBook in about 10 seconds. Yeah, this is just like phenomenally fast. So I'm going to talk about this more in a second, but this thing became a critical piece in how we were able to do this. Again, 10 seconds to move this thing from my Mac to the external hard drive and vice versa generally. Way faster. So we're grabbing this X5, we're hooking it up to their server. On their particular server, they didn't have a FireWire connection, but it was still faster than moving it to their file server and then onto my Mac. And they have a fast network, multiple gigabyte network and so forth. Again, fast, everything, best quality of everything in their environment. We found that copying the live files off the server onto this and then onto this box from this external onto my laptop much faster than doing file sharing over the network or whatever. So the sneaker net methodology, way faster for us. Other stuff about the drives, a lot of you are going to go, hey, did you try a RAM disk? You bet. So I've got a Mac. I have the ability. Jonathan Reff gave me a command line a couple of years ago that I use all the time, where I can spin up. You can just type in this terminal command, boom, and it'll grab some of your RAM and make a little RAM disk. And now you're theoretically in memory and not on the drive. So the RAM disk on a Mac is faster than the Mac internal drive. By the way, the Mac internal drive on a laptop, on a MacBook Pro, they are really good SSDs. They're really fast. Quite a bit faster even than that X5. That X5 external, slower than the Mac, way faster than you'll get on a USB or even most FireWire, or pardon me, I keep saying FireWire, Thunderbolt, faster than most Thunderbolt drives, crazy faster, 4 to 5 times faster than those. But the external drive, slower than the Mac internal drive, which is slower than the RAM disk. So pay very close attention, because we're going to go, this is the fastest, second fastest, third fastest. We're looking to squeeze the most ponies out of this. We also found that putting the fastest disk on the right side of what you're doing is going to be the best benefit. So if I have a slow drive and I go, I'm exporting on my slow drive and I'm writing those files to my faster drive, that's better than the other direction. Wherever you're writing the files, wherever you're importing to, wherever you're processing on, where a lot of the writing is happening, you want that to be on the fastest drive you have available to you. So speed of the drive is critical. Size of the drive is also critical. I can only, with 32 gigs of RAM on this laptop, I would spin up a 20 gigabyte RAM disk. That gives me about 12 gigs to run FileMaker and the OS. So I didn't want to get too crazy with pulling that away. Exporting all those 68 files, I want to say it turned into about, 12 gigs of data. Pulling it into the scrubber file, it turns into about 14 gigs of data. Pulling that data into the actual solution file, I can't hold for, it turns into about 30, 40 gigs of data. So I have to make sure that my last import step is not being done on the RAM disk, because I don't have enough physical size and I'm going to crash out. I'm going to fill the RAM disk and we're going to be hosed. So I got to pay attention to the size of the disk and the speed of the disk. And then I'm going to say, this is something, again, I talked about importing the batches and how breaking those big imports into small things, real eye-opener for me. This is another one. Get on the bus. And what I'm saying about this is having your source and your destination on separate physical drives gave us the best performance, regardless of speed. So let me give you an example. If I'm importing from the internal hard drive of my Mac onto the RAM disk, those are two separate volumes, but I'm not going to an external bus. I'm using the same internal sort of disk bus on that. That was actually slower. Those are my two fastest drives. So the RAM disk is the fastest at writing, and my next fastest drive is internal. But if I imported from this hard drive internally to this RAM disk internally, it was slower than if I imported from my external X5, the slower drive, slower than my internal drive, but I'm importing that to my RAM disk, and I'm going through the Lightning bus, and I'm not reading and writing from the same internal hardware. This is my assumption in terms of what's going on, but we tested this over and over and over. So bottom line, why did we use this external drive so much? Because anytime we could use the external, we saw a boost as opposed to importing or exporting from the same physical box. I thought that was really fascinating.
Right, amazing.
So, what have we just learned in the last few seconds? Put your fastest disk on the right side of whatever you're doing. Use an external drive. Anytime you're doing a migration, make sure one of the drives is external because you want to be on that bus that frees it up, right? And use the fastest version of FileMaker for each task. This is where Lynn Allen gets her question answered. So again, I used to be a professional disc jockey. You too could be if you followed what we did here. So here's what we did when we did these migrations. We put the solution, so we grabbed the customer's file and put it on it's already on the X5, it's on the external. We copied it over from the FileMaker server, it's on the external drive. We're gonna export 68 files from the X5 onto the RAM disk. We're going external to internal, that's good. We're going to the RAM disk, which is our fastest writing volume available, that's good. And we're not going to eclipse the size of it because this is going to come in at 12 gigs or something. And I got a 20 gig RAM disk. And because we're exporting, we're going to use FileMaker 18 because it's the fastest exporter. What are we going to do next? Because I want to go through that bus again, and because I want to use the RAM disk as my write to location, I'm going to copy all 68 files from the RAM disk to my X5, which takes seconds. 10 seconds or less. And I'm going to clear off the RAM disk so it's empty. I got 20 gigs of space available. Now I'm going to put the scrubber file on the RAM disk. It's going to be my destination, and I'm going to import from here onto the RAM disk. So again, I'm writing to my fastest drive, and I'm using an external drive also, so I get that benefit of not clogging up my bus. So I'm importing the 68 files from the X5 to the RAM disk. And I'm using FileMaker 16 because 16 imports faster than the other versions. We're going to process the CSS on the RAM disk. We're not running out of space. We also already figured out 16, 17, 18, largely the same when they're running looping scripts. So no reason to, so we could chain these two events together without having to stop and restart FileMaker. So now I've got, let's just say I've got about 15 gigs of data on my RAM disk inside this scrubber file. But I know if I input it into the solution, it's going to go to 40 gigs, calc, summaries, et cetera, et cetera. So I got to move it. The RAM disk is too small. I'm going to grab my final clone. I'm going to put it on the internal hard drive of my Mac. I'm going to move the scrubber because I want to use the bus again. So I'm going to grab the scrubber that was on the RAM disk, copy it back over here. That takes a couple of seconds. Delete the RAM disk. I don't need it anymore. It's too small to be used for any of the processes. I got to go through the bus, and it's not big enough for me to write to. So there's no reason to use the RAM disk anymore. So now I'm going to import from the scrubber on the external X5 drive to the clone file sitting on the internal hard drive of the Mac. And I'm going to use FileMaker 16 because it's the fastest import engine that I've got available to me. Now that I'm there, saving compacted doesn't matter. So even though it's not as fast saving from the internal hard drive to the X5, this is a faster hard drive, but I was able to script this and go import these import these 68 files, and as soon as you're finished, save a compacted back to the X5 and so forth. So I could let that run, without having to interrupt things. Anyway, I think you can see a bit of crazy shuffle, paying attention to the versions, the drives, the size, the speed, all of these little tiny things made for significantly faster processes. Other last little things I'll leave you with, when you're running these kind of lengthy processes, turn stuff off. I'm in the middle of my first night of running one of these loops, and Crash Plan is trying to run in the background and back up 68, 45 gigs of files and all this stuff. Nope. Turn off Time Machine, turn off your notifications, turn off Crash Plan, strip your laptop or whatever box is doing your processes. Get rid of all these things. Build some monitoring scripts. Again, this is taking 19 hours to run. We have these files. I want to be able to go, this one took 2 hours, this one took 3 hours, this one took 5 minutes. I want to be able to see those. So we had the ability to kind of do a beep. If we're doing a small thing, I'm sitting there watching TV and behind me I hear a beep. I go, oh, it finished the contact module. Let's see how long that took. I could hear that something significant happened. We would also do a screen refresh and freeze so that you could come back to the dashboard and kind of see what it had touched last. That worked well sometimes, other times it didn't. So we actually formatted in the ability to take a max screenshot. Hey, after every single module was finished, freeze the window, pause the FileMaker scripts for a second, take a screen grab, and then move on to the next thing. So I could just look on the desktop and find the last screenshot to see what the last process was. You can also do the same thing with emails. I could, grab a screen grab or send some documentation very quickly into an email and go finish the order modules at this time, etc. But make sure when you have these long processes, have some way to check what's going on without interrupting it by having these little fail safes. So it is possible to reanimate dead tissue or almost dead tissue. Again, you can see we did a lot of things here, but we got a good significant outcome on it. Careful planning, test things, measure, and document what you did so that you can come back and go, that didn't work, let's try another thing. You got to know what you've done to know what you can try next. So do be very careful there. Spending time on the deep and geeky on occasion, you can really get some benefits to this and really get some payoff. Those small little things that we paid attention to, again, can shave hours or even days off of certain processes. So I think it's important to kind of pay attention to that. Hardware that you use and the versions matter. That is it. I am open for Q&A if anybody has any at this point.